The planet Varith 9 was not a place anyone wanted to be. It sat at the far edge of the Galactic Council's mapped territory, cold, gray, and mostly forgotten. The wind there never really stopped. It just changed direction. Sometimes it blew hard from the north, carrying ice dust that scratched the skin. Sometimes it came slow and low from the east, which was almost worse because that kind brought the smell of nothing. Just empty, dead air that reminded everyone how far they were from anywhere warm. The outpost itself was small. A handful of buildings made from pressed cargo panels, a power station that hummed too loud at night, a storage yard full of supply crates, and a fence that ran around the whole thing in a wide square. The fence was tall and made of dark metal. It did not keep anything dangerous out. There was nothing dangerous on Varith 9. It was mostly just there so people had something to look at when they needed to feel like the edge of the world had a border. Seth had been at the outpost for 2 years. He was not a soldier. He was not a scientist or a diplomat or anything important. He was a supply officer. His job was to count things, move things, and make sure the right things went to the right places. He did this work every day without complaint, filled out his reports every evening, and went to sleep when the lights dimmed. He did not talk much. Not because he was rude, but because there was not much he felt like saying. The other crew members had their own groups, their own conversations, their own ways of passing time. Seth was not part of any of them. Not by anyone's choice. It had just worked out that way, slowly, over months, the way these things sometimes do. He ate his meals outside. This was something he had started doing in his first week, and he never stopped. He would take his food from the meal station, walk past the tables where the others sat and talked, push open the side door, and go sit on the old metal step just inside the fence line. There was a broken cargo crate out there that blocked some of the wind, and if he sat in the right spot, he could see the sky above the fence top. The sky on Varith 9 was usually a flat, pale color, not quite white, not quite gray, but sometimes near the end of the day, it went a dark blue that Seth found beautiful. Nobody else seemed to notice it. He noticed it every time. He ate slowly. He was not in a hurry to go back inside. On the night everything changed, Seth had a meal of pressed grain, a small portion of warm broth, and 2 pieces of hard bread. It was not good food. It was the kind of food that kept a person going without giving them anything to look forward to. He sat on his step, broke 1 piece of bread in half out of habit, and looked up at the sky. It was going dark blue again. He watched it for a while. Then he heard a sound. It was small. Very small. It came from the other side of the broken crate, low to the ground. Seth did not move right away. He just listened. The sound came again, a short, rough noise like something catching its breath wrong. He put his bread down on his knee and leaned forward slightly, trying to see around the corner of the crate without standing up. He saw a tail first. It was dark green, thin, and shaking. It disappeared behind the crate and then came into view again, pressed flat against the ground. Seth sat very still. He knew the Dravith existed. Everyone in the Galactic Council's territory knew about them. Dragonkind. Ancient. Proud. Dangerous when they wanted to be. He had never seen one in person. He had certainly never expected to see one here, behind a broken crate on the worst posting in the known sectors. He stood up slowly and stepped around the edge of the crate. She was very small. Even Seth, who did not know much about Dravith, could tell that she was young. A child. She was curled into the narrow space between the crate and the fence, pressed as flat as she could make herself, like she was trying to become part of the ground. Her scales were dark green with a faint shine that the cold had nearly taken away. There was a wound on her right side, not fresh but not healed either. Old and ragged, the kind that comes from something sharp and is left alone too long. Her wings, small and folded in tight, had a tear along one edge. She was shaking. When she saw Seth, she pulled her head up and made a sound, short, sharp, low in the throat. A warning. Her eyes were bright amber and very afraid, even as she tried to look dangerous. She could not hold the position. After a moment, her head dropped back down. She did not have the strength for it. Seth looked at her for a long time. He did not think about Dravith politics. He did not think about what Captain Ford would say, or what the Galactic Council's rules were about contact with dragonkind on border planets. He was not a political person. He was not a person who thought about consequences before he acted when something simple was in front of him. What was in front of him was a child who was hurt and cold and had not eaten in a long time. He could tell that last part just from looking. The way her ribs were visible through the scales. The way she could not hold her head up. He looked down at his meal. The 2 pieces of bread. The broth. The pressed grain. He picked up 1 piece of bread and the container of grain and set them on the ground about 2 meters in front of her. Then he walked back to his step and sat down again. He picked up his remaining bread and the broth and kept eating his own meal, slowly looking up at the sky. He did not look at her directly. He kept his eyes up. For a long time nothing happened. The wind moved. The power station hummed from inside the fence. The sky went from dark blue to almost black. Then he heard a sound, the small scrape of something moving across the ground. He did not look. He heard it again. Closer. Then a pause. A long one. Then the sound of eating. Seth kept his eyes on the sky. He finished his broth. He broke the last piece of his bread into two and ate one half slowly. He did not look at her. He did not make any sudden movement. He just sat there in the cold, watching the dark come in like he did every evening. By the time he finally stood up and picked up his empty containers to go back inside, she had moved. She was not behind the crate anymore. She was lying in the open space just beside it, still curled up, but with her head lifted slightly off the ground. The grain container was empty. The bread was gone. She watched him as he stood. He looked at her once, just one look, not long, and then he turned and walked back toward the side door of the outpost. He pushed it open and stepped inside into the warm light. He cleaned his containers, filed his evening report, and went to sleep at the usual time. He did not tell anyone what he had seen. He did think about it before he closed his eyes, though. He thought about those amber eyes trying to look fierce and only managing to look frightened. He thought about how she had eaten. Carefully at first, and then quickly, like she had been holding herself back and could not hold on any longer. He made a decision there in the dark before sleep came. Tomorrow he would take a little more food than usual from the meal station, just in case she came back. She came back the next evening. Seth had not been completely sure she would. He had thought about it during his work shift, moving supply crates from one section of the yard to another, checking numbers on his board, signing off on deliveries. He had thought, maybe she moved on. Maybe she found her way back to wherever she came from. Maybe she was strong enough by now to go. But when he pushed open the side door that evening with his meal and a small extra portion he had quietly taken from the station, she was already there, sitting beside the broken crate, waiting. He stopped in the doorway for just a moment. Then he walked to his step and sat down like it was any other evening. He set the extra portion on the ground in front of him and slid it forward with his boot, the same distance as the night before. Then he looked up at the sky and started eating his own meal. She moved faster tonight. Not fast but faster than before. She crossed the space between them and ate without the long pause. When she was done, she went back to her spot beside the crate and curled up. Seth finished his meal. He went inside. That was all. The next evening the same. The evening after that the same. By the end of the first week, there was a small routine between them that neither of them had spoken about or agreed to. It had simply grown the way quiet things do without anyone deciding it. Seth would come outside. He would set the food down. He would eat his own meal and look at the sky. She would eat. Then they would both sit in the cold for a while before Seth went in. He started thinking of her as Ember. He did not say this out loud. It was just a name he had for her in his own head, something to call her when he thought about her during the day, which he was beginning to do more often than he expected. The name came from her eyes. When the evening light hit them at the right angle, they glowed. Not bright, not like fire, but like something that had been fire a long time ago and still held the warmth deep inside. Like the last piece of coal at the bottom of a stove. Ember. It fit her. In the second week, he noticed her wound was looking better. He could not get close enough to see it properly and he was careful not to try. But the way she moved was different. Less stiff. She was not protecting her right side as much when she shifted position. Whatever had happened to her, the rest and the food were helping. Her scales had more color too. When she had first appeared behind the crate, they were dull, like dark stone that had been left in the rain. Now there was a faint shine to them in the evening light. Not much, but it was there. He brought her water on the 8th day. Just a flat container of clean water, set beside the food. She looked at it for a long time before she drank. After that, he brought water every evening. By the 3rd week she had moved closer. Not to him, not exactly. But the spot she chose to sit in after eating had shifted. She no longer went back to the far side of the crate. She settled down in the middle space between the crate and his step, maybe 3 meters away. She would curl her tail around herself and rest her head on her front legs and watch him sideways while he finished eating. He pretended not to notice. He looked at the sky. He ate his bread slowly. He did not make eye contact for long. He had figured out early on that direct, long eye contact made her tense. A quick glance was fine. Staring was not. He kept his glances short and then looked away, like she was just part of the evening scenery. On the night of the 22nd day he brought an old book outside. He had found it in the bottom of his supply locker, a paper book which was unusual enough out here in the sectors. It was a collection of old stories from Earth. He had read it before years ago, but he brought it out that evening mostly for something to do with his hands after he finished eating. He opened it and began to read out loud, quietly. Not performing. Not trying to entertain anyone. Just reading at a low, even pace the way a person reads to themselves when they think they are alone. Ember's head came up. She looked at him directly for a long moment. He kept reading. After a while, her head went back down, but her eyes stayed open and pointed in his direction. He read for about 20 minutes then went inside. The next evening he brought the book again. And the evening after that. It became part of the routine. Food, water, sky book. On the 31st day she fell asleep against his boot. He had not heard her move. He was deep in a chapter, reading about a sea voyage on an old Earth ocean, and somewhere between one paragraph and the next she had crossed the remaining distance and settled down with her small head resting against the side of his boot. He felt the weight of it and stopped reading. He looked down. She was asleep. Actually asleep, not resting, not watching him from behind half-closed eyes the way she sometimes did, but fully, deeply asleep. Her breathing was slow and even. The torn edge of her wing rose and fell gently. Seth did not move. He sat completely still for a long time. His foot was at an uncomfortable angle and he did not shift it. He looked down at her and felt something in his chest that he did not have a clean word for. Not quite sadness. Not quite happiness. Something that sat between the two, heavy and warm at the same time. He had not had anyone trust him this much in a long time. He had not realized until this moment how much he had missed it. He sat there until the cold got serious, then he very carefully, very slowly moved his foot just enough to ease the angle. She made a small sound but did not wake. He went back to his book and read one more chapter in the dark before he finally, reluctantly, went inside. Captain Ford found him the next morning. Ford was not a bad person. He was a practical one. He had been running outposts on difficult postings for 11 years, and he had the kind of face that had learned to stay flat when things got complicated. He came to Seth's section of the supply yard just after the morning shift started and stood beside him while Seth checked a delivery list. He said he had seen the dragon child from the upper observation window. He said he had seen her eating Seth's food, and he had watched for 3 evenings before he said anything because he wanted to be sure of what he was seeing. Then he explained, in the careful way he explained things he did not enjoy explaining, what the Dravith believed about food. Among dragonkind, feeding a child was never a neutral act. It was never just kindness. The Dravith had no concept for it being just kindness. If you fed a Dravith child, you were making a statement. You were saying that child was connected to you, or that you were connected to them. Depending on who the child belonged to, this could mean very different things. Some clans would see it as an insult, a suggestion that they could not care for their own young. Others would see it as a claim, a challenge, a provocation. Ford did not know which clan the child belonged to, and that was exactly the problem. He told Seth plainly that this needed to stop. For the outpost's sake. For Seth's sake. Seth listened to all of it. He did not argue. He nodded in the right places and asked no questions. When Ford was finished, Seth thanked him and said he understood. Ford looked at him for a moment, then nodded back and walked away. That evening, Seth went to the meal station. He took his portion. He took the extra portion he had been taking for 31 days. He pushed open the side door and walked to his step and sat down. Ember was already there, sitting beside the crate, watching the door. He set the food down on the ground and slid it forward with his boot. He picked up his book and found the page he had left off on. He read out loud quietly while she ate. The sky went dark blue above the fence. Then darker. The power station hummed. The wind came slow from the east and brought the smell of nothing. Seth turned a page. Some things, once started, are hard to explain to the part of you that knows better. And some things, once you have felt them, are harder still to walk away from, even when walking away would be the sensible choice. He had not made a decision to keep coming out here. He simply had not made a decision to stop. The change in Ember happened slowly, the way most real changes do. It was not one morning where Seth came outside and found her different. It was more like watching a plant grow. You never see the moment it happens, but one day you look and realize something has shifted. The creature that had been pressed flat against the ground behind a broken crate, shaking in the cold, barely able to lift her head, was not the same creature sitting in the open evening air beside Seth's step anymore. She was bigger. Not dramatically, she was still small, still clearly young, but there was more of her now. Her frame had filled out. The place where her ribs had shone through her scales was gone. Her neck held her head up easily without effort. When she moved with a kind of quiet confidence that had not been there before. Her scales had changed the most. In the beginning they had been dull, like old stone pulled from deep water. Now they caught the light. Not flashy, not the way polished armor catches light, but the way a river catches it. Moving. Alive. In the evenings, when the sky went dark blue and the last of the day sat low on the horizon, her scales shifted between green and something that was almost gold. Seth noticed it every time, though he never said anything about it. There was nobody to say it to. The wing that had been torn was healing too. The tear had closed into a thin line that was lighter than the rest of the wing's edge. She had started stretching her wings in the evenings, just small movements, testing them. She never flew, Seth was not sure she could yet, but she spread them slightly sometimes, held them open for a few seconds, then folded them back in. Like someone slowly learning to trust a healed bone. Then the gift started. The first one appeared on a morning when Seth came out to check the supply yard after his shift report. It was sitting on the metal step where he sat every evening. A smooth stone, pale gray, perfectly round, about the size of his closed fist. He picked it up and turned it over in his hand. It was cold from the night air but had no dust on it, which meant it had been placed there recently. He looked around the yard. Empty. He looked at the broken crate. Nothing visible. He put the stone in his jacket pocket and went back to work. The next evening Ember was there as always, sitting in her usual spot, watching him the way she watched him now, not with fear, not with the tense readiness to run that she had carried in the early weeks, but with something easy and familiar. Seth set the food down. He reached into his pocket and took out the smooth stone. He held it up for a moment, looking at it, then set it on the step beside him. Ember watched this. Her head tilted very slightly to one side. He was not sure what it meant. He started reading. 3 days later there was a piece of old metal on the step. Flat, dark, roughly triangular, worn smooth on all its edges. The kind of piece that comes off heavy machinery after long use. Not sharp, not dangerous, just a thing that had been part of something bigger and had eventually come loose. Seth added it to the stone on the windowsill inside his quarters. Then he thought about that for a moment. He had not planned to keep them inside. He had just done it without thinking. More came. Not every day, sometimes a week would pass with nothing, but steadily. Another stone, this one darker and with a faint stripe of color through the middle. A short length of wire, bent into a shape that might have been accidental or might not have been. A piece of smooth gray bone from some Varith 9 creature, cleaned and dry. A small flat disc of metal with markings on it that Seth did not recognize. He kept all of them on the windowsill. He thought about what it meant in a quiet way during his work days. He had heard that some creatures brought objects to places or beings that mattered to them. Birds did it on Earth, he remembered. Some birds collected things that caught their eye and brought them back. Whether it meant the same thing for a Dravith child he did not know. He was not a diplomat or a researcher. But he understood the feeling behind it, he thought. The impulse to bring something to someone. To say without words, I found this and I thought of you. He understood that feeling well. He was thinking about the latest piece, a small round fragment of something dark and very smooth like volcanic glass, when the alarm sounded. It was not the loud alarm, the one that meant immediate danger. It was the lower, steadier one that meant something had been detected in orbit. Seth put down his supply board and looked up. Around him, the other crew members were already moving toward the observation building. He followed at a distance. The ship on the scanner was unlike anything that had visited Varith 9 before. It was not a council vessel. It was not a trade ship. It was Dravith. The scanner identified the design clearly, angular, dark, built for speed and silence rather than size. A scout ship. Small crew. In and out. Captain Ford's voice came over the outpost channel, steady and professional, telling everyone to stay calm and continue normal operations while he attempted communication. Seth went back to the supply yard. He worked through the rest of his shift with one part of his mind on the crates and numbers in front of him, and another part somewhere he could not quite name. A Dravith scout ship. Here. The timing sat in his stomach in a way he did not examine too closely. The ship did not respond to Ford's communication attempts. It simply stayed in orbit. By the time Seth's shift ended and he collected his evening meal, word had moved through the outpost that 3 figures had been detected descending from the ship. Not a landing craft. They had come down directly under their own power, which meant they were Dravith warriors in full flight capability. The outpost's external sensors had tracked them coming down half a kilometer out and then moving toward the fence on foot. Seth carried his meal to the side door. He pushed it open and stepped outside. Ember was there. She was standing, not sitting, standing fully upright, her head raised, her nostrils moving. She had sensed something before he came out. Her body was tense in a way he had not seen in weeks, but she did not move away. She looked at the sky and then at Seth and then at the sky again. Seth sat down on his step. He set the food on the ground and slid it forward. She did not eat right away, which was unusual. She kept standing, kept watching the open ground beyond the fence. Then they came around the corner of the outer fence line. 3 of them. Tall. Much taller than Seth, taller than any being currently stationed at the outpost. Armored in dark plate that covered them from neck to ankle. The joints reinforced with overlapping pieces that allowed movement without giving any gap. Their wings were folded and locked against their backs in the way warriors fold them. Tight, controlled, ready to open in an instant. Their faces were visible. Long, angular, with eyes that held the same amber color as embers but colder. Much colder. Seth did not move. He noticed the markings on their armor. He did not know Dravith insignia in detail, but even he could see that what was on these 3 was not standard military markings. The symbol on the chest plate of each warrior was the same, a circular design with a shape at its center that caught the evening light and held it. Gold thread or something like it woven into dark metal. Something important. Something that did not belong on a simple border patrol. The 3 warriors stopped when they saw Ember. It was not a gradual stop, it was sudden and complete, like something had cut the movement from them. The one on the left stared. The one on the right became completely still in the way that very dangerous things become still before they act. The one in the center, the largest, looked at Ember, then at Seth, then at Ember again. Ember pressed herself against Seth's side. He felt the weight of her, warm and solid, against his leg, and he did not move away from it. He sat with his meal in his hands and looked at the 3 warriors across the yard and waited. The warrior on the left raised one arm and pressed something on the inside of their wrist. A signal. Fast and deliberate. The other 2 moved without a word. Not toward Seth. Not toward Ember. They spread out, taking positions at the corners of the open area, wings still locked, eyes moving across every angle of the space around the broken crate and the step in the fence. Not attacking. Not threatening. Guarding. Whatever they had just seen, it had not made them angry. It had made them careful. Seth looked down at Ember. She was still pressed against his side, her eyes on the warriors, her breathing fast but controlled. He looked back at the 3 armored figures standing silent in the cold evening air. The sky above the fence was going dark blue. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And somewhere above them, beyond the clouds, whatever signal had just been sent was already traveling somewhere very far away, to someone who had been waiting a very long time for exactly this news. The signal that had been sent from the warrior's wrist did not take long to get a response. Seth had expected to wait. He had imagined that whoever was on the other end of that signal was far away, that there would be hours, maybe a full day before anything changed. He had thought perhaps the scout ship in orbit would descend, or that more warriors would arrive on foot the way these 3 had. He had thought there would be some kind of process, the slow machinery of official contact, the back and forth of communication, the careful steps of something political and formal. He was wrong about all of it. It took 40 minutes. He knew the time because he had been watching the faint line of the horizon above the fence, and the sky had only shifted one shade darker when the sound came. Not an alarm this time. Something lower. Something that did not come from the outpost at all. It came from above, from the clouds themselves, a deep vibration that Seth felt in his chest before he heard it properly with his ears. A pressure, like the air was being pushed aside by something very large moving through it very fast. Then the warship came through the clouds. It did not appear gradually. One moment the sky was empty and the next it was not, because the ship was already there, already below the cloud line, already descending. It was enormous. Seth had seen Galactic Council warships in images and once at a distance from a transport vessel, and those had seemed large enough. This was different. This was the kind of size that changed the scale of everything around it. The outpost, which had always seemed solid and permanent to Seth in the way that structures feel permanent when you live in them, suddenly looked small. The fence looked like a child's toy. The broken cargo crate looked like a piece of paper. The ship was dark. Not painted dark. Dark the way deep water is dark, as if light went into it and did not come back out. Its shape was angular and purposeful, built with no curve that did not have a reason. Along its edges, markings ran in long lines that caught the light in gold, the same gold Seth had seen on the chest plates of the 3 warriors still standing at the corners of the yard. The same circular symbol, but larger here. Much larger. Spread across the front face of the ship where it could be seen from a distance. A statement. Not decoration. The outpost alarm went off. Not the low-orbit detection alarm this time, the full one, loud and urgent, the one that meant all personnel inside immediately. Seth heard it clearly. He heard the side door bang open behind him and the sound of boots on the ground and Ford's voice cutting through everything, sharp and controlled, telling people to move, to get inside, to go now. Seth did not go. He heard the door open and close. Open and close again. Voices, urgent and low, from somewhere behind him. Then Ford's voice, closer at the door. Seth. Inside. Now. Seth looked at the ship descending above him. He looked at Ember pressed hard against his side. She was shaking, not the weak shaking of cold and starvation that she had arrived with all those weeks ago, but a different kind. A tense, full-body vibration like a wire pulled too tight. Her eyes were locked on the ship and her breathing had changed, shorter and faster, but she did not move away from Seth's side. He put his hand down very slowly and rested it lightly on the top of her head. She did not pull away. Seth. Ford again. I'm staying, Seth said. Simply. Without drama. Pause. Then the door closed. The ship settled. It did not land the way human vessels land, with the slow, careful business of finding flat ground and extending supports. It came down with a certainty that assumed the ground would accommodate it, and the ground did. The weight of it displaced air in a wave that Seth felt against his face and chest, warm and electric. Dust from the yard floor lifted and moved outward in all directions. The three warriors braced slightly and then straightened. For a moment after the ship was down, nothing happened. Then the front face of the ship opened. Not a ramp. A section of the hull separated cleanly and rose, and from inside came light, warm and gold, that spilled out across the gray ground of the yard. In that light, figures moved. Several of them taking positions just outside the opening. More warriors, these ones in formation, standing with a stillness that spoke of long practice. And then she came out. Seth had no frame of reference for Queen Sareth. He had not known who he was waiting for. He had not known the name or the face or the history. He knew almost nothing about Dravith royalty beyond the bare facts anyone in the sectors knew, that they existed, that they were ancient, that the Crown House commanded more loyalty from dragonkind than the Galactic Council had ever managed to understand or negotiate with. But when she walked out of that ship, he understood immediately that whoever she was not someone who needed a title explained. It was in the way she moved. Not fast, not slow, measured. Each step placed with complete intention, as if the ground she walked on was hers not because she claimed it but because nothing in her had ever considered the possibility that it might not be. Her armor was full war plate, dark like the ship, with gold at every edge and joint. It fit her the way armor fits someone who has worn it for decades, not a costume but a second skin. Her wings were folded but not locked the way the warrior's wings were locked. They were simply resting, relaxed, which somehow made them more impressive, not less. Size without effort. Power without performance. Her face was angular and old in the way that things built to last are old, not worn down but worn in. Her eyes were amber. The same amber as embers, but where embers held warmth and curiosity, these held something deeper and harder to name. The kind of eyes that had seen a great many things and had learned to look at all of them without flinching. She walked across the yard directly toward Seth. The three warriors fell into position behind her without being told. The formation from the ship stayed where they were, watching the perimeter. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the faint hum of the ship's systems cooling and the steady wind from the east. She stopped 6 feet in front of Seth. She looked at him first. A full look, the kind that takes its time, moving from his face to his hands to the way he was standing to the old book still tucked under his arm, as if she was reading a document and wanted to understand it completely before she responded. Then she looked down at Ember. Something happened in her face when she looked at Ember. It was brief, very brief, almost nothing, but Seth was close enough to see it. The controlled surface of her expression shifted for just a moment, like the surface of still water when something moves underneath. There and gone. But he saw it. Ember had gone completely still against Seth's side. She was not hiding. She was not pulling away or pressing closer. She was just still, in a way she had never been still before, her eyes on the Queen, her breathing almost stopped. The Queen looked at Ember for a long time. Then she spoke. Not to Seth, not yet. She said something in the Dravith tongue, low and direct. 3 words or something close to it. Seth did not understand them. But Ember did. The small sound that came out of Ember was not like any sound Seth had heard from her before. Not the warning growl from the first night. Not the soft sound she made when she was settling down to sleep. This was smaller than all of those. Simpler. The sound of something that had been alone and afraid for a long time and had just heard something that it recognized at the very deepest level. The sound a child makes when it finally sees its mother. Seth understood then. He looked at the queen. He looked at the gold markings on her armor. He looked at the ship behind her and the warriors in formation and the royal symbol that matched the scouts who had arrived first. He thought about 3 months. Ford had said the scout ship had come from 17 star systems of search territory. He thought about Ember arriving at the outpost wounded and starving and alone. He thought about a smooth stone on his windowsill. A piece of metal. A torn wing healing slowly under the cold Vareth 9 sky. The queen's eyes moved back to Seth. She looked at him the way she had looked at that document. Complete. Unhurried. Then she spoke in his language and her voice was exactly what he should have expected from her. Even, deep, carrying the particular weight of someone who had not needed to raise their voice in a very long time. This child, she said, has been missing for 3 months. It was not a question. Seth looked at her. He looked at Ember beside him. He thought about the first evening, the broken crate, the shaking tail, the meal torn in half and placed on the ground. He said the only true thing he had. She was hungry. I had food. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, from behind the queen, the sound of armor moving. The 3 warriors reached for their weapons in one smooth motion, and the formation at the ship entrance shifted forward by half a step. The queen did not move. She kept her eyes on Seth. And Seth kept his eyes on hers. Neither of them looked away. The weapons were not small. Seth had seen Dravith arms in council reference files. Everyone at a border outpost was required to read the basic threat assessment documents when they first arrived. He had read them, filed them away in the part of his mind reserved for information that was important but probably never relevant, and moved on. Standing in the yard now, with 3 of those weapons drawn and the formation at the ship shifting forward, he understood that the reference files had not done them justice. They were long. Longer than Seth was tall. Dark metal with the same gold threading as the armor, built with an edge along one side that caught the evening light in a way that made the eye want to move away from it. Not decorative. Not ceremonial. The kind of weapon that had been used many times and would be used again without hesitation if the order came. Seth did not move. He was aware, in a calm and distant way, that he probably should be afraid. Some part of him registered the information. Weapons drawn, warriors forward, a queen watching him from 6 feet away, and processed it as danger. But the larger part of him was occupied with something simpler. He was watching Ember. She had pressed closer against his leg when the weapons came out, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her through his trousers. She was not making any sound. She was watching her mother. The queen had not moved either. She had not signaled the warriors forward. She had not looked at them or acknowledged the weapons at all. She kept her eyes on Seth with the same complete, patient attention she had given him since she stepped off the ship. She spoke. You know what you did. It was not a question, but it was not quite a statement either. It sat in the middle, waiting. Seth considered it honestly. I know what I did, he said. I fed a child who was hungry. I don't know what else I did if you're telling me there was something else. Something shifted very slightly in the queen's expression. Not anger. Not surprise. Something more like a person adjusting their footing when the ground turns out to be slightly different from what they expected. Then I will tell you, she said. She began. Her voice remained even throughout. She did not perform it, did not make it dramatic or threatening. She simply laid out the facts the way someone lays out objects on a table, placing each one down clearly so it could be examined. She told him that among the Dravith, food given to a child by someone outside the bloodline was never a neutral act. It carried meaning. Specific meaning, with specific consequences, that every being in the known sectors who had any dealings with dragonkind was expected to understand. She told him that feeding a Dravith child once could be interpreted as a gesture of territorial claim, a statement that the child fell under the feeder's protection, which in Dravith law placed the feeder in direct opposition to the child's bloodline. Seth listened. She told him that feeding the child repeatedly, over an extended period, compounded this. It was not one gesture but a sustained declaration. Under the old laws that still governed every Crown House decision, this constituted a formal challenge to the child's family. A challenge of this nature, issued against the Crown, carried a specific and serious consequence. She paused after this and looked at him. Seth looked back. He said nothing yet. He was still listening. She told him that he had also given the child water, shelter from the cold, and what appeared to be consistent companionship over a period of weeks. Each of these, under Dravith custom, added layers to the original act. Companionship in particular was significant. It was not something given lightly among her kind. It implied a bond of responsibility. It implied that the one offering it considered themselves in some way accountable for the child's well-being. She told him that the book, she had been told about the book by her scouts, who had observed from orbit for 2 evenings before descending, was perhaps the detail that had caused the greatest confusion among her advisors aboard the ship. Reading aloud to a Dravith child was something done only by those within the innermost circle of family and trust. Her advisors had debated for some time whether it was possible that a human could have done this without understanding its weight. The debate had not been fully resolved. She stopped. The yard was silent. The wind had dropped. The ship hummed quietly behind her. "I am giving you the opportunity," the Queen said, "to tell me that you did not know. That it was accident. That you found the child and acted without understanding what your actions would mean." She kept her eyes on him. "This is the opportunity. It will not come twice." Seth understood what she was offering him. A way out. A door she had opened specifically for him, held wide, clearly lit. All he had to do was walk through it. Say the word. Call it ignorance, call it accident, and let the machinery of diplomacy take over and smooth everything down. He thought about it for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "I didn't know any of those laws. I still don't know most of them properly hearing them now." He paused. "But I can't tell you it was an accident because it wasn't. I saw her the first night and I gave her half my meal. The next evening I took extra food on purpose because I thought she might come back. Every evening after that I brought food and water because she needed it and I had it." He looked at the Queen steadily. "That wasn't an accident. That was a choice. I made it every day." The Queen was very still. "You understood none of the laws," she said. "None," Seth said. "Not one. But you chose to continue regardless." "I chose to feed a child who was hurt and hungry," Seth said. "I'd make the same choice again. I don't think knowing the laws would change that." Silence. Then Seth did something that nobody on the ship, and none of the warriors, and not Captain Ford watching pale-faced from the upper observation window, expected. He looked down at Ember. He looked at the way she was standing now, not pressed against his leg anymore but standing slightly forward between him and her mother, in a way that might have been unconscious or might not have been. He looked at her right side, the side where the wound had been when she first arrived. He looked back at the Queen. "Her leg," he said. "When she first came she was favoring it. The right side. She was stiff there for the first 2 weeks." His voice was not uncertain. Just plain. "Is it healed properly?" I could never get close enough to see it clearly. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from all the silences before it. It was the kind of silence that falls when something unexpected has entered a room and everyone present needs a moment to understand what it is. The Queen looked at Seth. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that the warriors behind her had gone completely motionless, not reaching for anything, not adjusting position, simply still. Long enough that the gold light from the ship's open door had shifted slightly as the evening moved. She looked down at Ember. Ember, for her part, had turned her head and was looking up at Seth with those amber eyes that glowed like the last of a fire. From behind the Queen, from the left side of the warrior formation, the eldest of the 3 scouts made a sound. "Oh." Brief. And then he turned away. Not in dismissal. Not in discomfort. In the Dravith manner of deep respect. The turning of the body away from something one finds too honorable to look at directly. Seth did not know this. He simply saw an old warrior turn his face away and thought perhaps the cold was getting to him. But the Queen knew. And the other warriors knew. One by one, without a word or signal, the drawn weapons lowered. Not dropped. Not put away entirely. Lowered. The arms holding them relaxed, the tips coming down toward the ground, the warriors' stances shifting from readiness to something quieter. The Queen looked at Seth one final time with that complete, unhurried attention. Then she did something that her advisors aboard the ship, watching through the vessel's sensors, would speak about for years afterward. Something that had not been recorded in any interaction between the Crown House and an outside species in living memory. She inclined her head. Not a bow. The Queen of the Dravith Crown did not bow. But an inclination, a slow, deliberate lowering of her chin and a brief closing of her eyes, which in her culture carried the specific meaning of one who acknowledges something real. Seth did not know what it meant. He nodded back because it seemed like the right thing to do. Ember made a soft sound beside him, low and warm, like a coal settling in a fire. And above them, the sky on Vareth 9 went the darkest blue it had been all season, deep and wide and full of stars coming out one by one, as if the night itself had decided this moment was worth showing up for properly. The morning after the Queen's ship landed, the outpost felt different. Not in any way Seth could point to and describe clearly. The buildings were the same. The supply yard was the same. The fence ran its same square around everything, and the power station hummed its same too loud hum, and the sky was the same flat pale color it always was before the evening came and made it beautiful. Nothing physical had changed. But something had. Seth noticed it in the way the other crew members moved through the corridors that morning. Quieter than usual. More careful with their steps, as if the floor might report back to someone. He passed 3 people on his way to the meal station, and all 3 of them looked at him the way people look at someone they are not sure they recognize anymore. Familiar face, uncertain category. He collected his breakfast and sat at the inside table for once, because the Queen's ship was still in the yard, and sitting on his step outside did not feel like his step in the same way this morning. Captain Ford came to find him before the shift started. Ford looked like a man who had spent the night sitting up with thoughts he could not organize into anything useful. His face was the same controlled flat it always was, but underneath the control there was tiredness. He sat down across from Seth without being invited, which was unusual, and put his hands flat on the table. He said that the Queen had sent a communication to the outpost's formal channel overnight. That she had requested a meeting. Not with Ford. Ford was very clear about this, and Seth could hear in his voice that he was still processing what it meant. Not with the outpost commander. Not with the Galactic Council representative who had been frantically contacted overnight and was apparently still trying to find a vessel fast enough to get here before everything resolved itself. With Seth. Seth finished his breakfast first. Then he said he understood and went to find his jacket. The meeting happened in the yard, in the open air, which was the Queen's preference. Her advisors had come out from the ship. 4 of them, older warriors without the full armor of the scouts, wearing the structured garments of those whose role was counsel rather than combat. They stood to one side. Ford stood to the other with 2 of the outpost's senior crew, none of whom appeared entirely comfortable in their own bodies at that moment. Ember was already in the yard when Seth came out. She was sitting near his step, in the particular way she sat when she was waiting for him specifically. She watched him come across the yard and made the small low sound she had started making in the 4th week, the one that meant something close to acknowledgement. He nodded at her the way he always did, without making a production of it. The Queen stood in the center of the yard. In the morning light she looked different from the evening before, not less impressive but differently impressive. The full war armor was gone. She wore structured dark clothing with gold at the collar and cuffs, and without the armor's bulk she was still large by human standards but more plainly present. More like a person and less like a force. She watched Seth cross the yard and waited until he was standing before her before she spoke. She said that she had spent the night in council with her advisors. That the matter of Seth's actions and what they meant under Dravith law had been examined from all sides. That there had been disagreement among her advisors about several points but not about the conclusion. She said that Seth was to be named an honored guardian of the Dravith crown. Seth looked at her. She continued. The title was not a ceremonial one. It carried specific meaning and specific protections. It had been given, in the long history of the crown, to Dravith of extraordinary merit. It had never been given to an outside species. This was not, she said, because no outside species had ever merited it. It was because the particular combination of actions required to earn it, actions that had to be genuine, uncoerced, and taken without knowledge of the laws they fulfilled, had never before been performed by someone outside dragonkind. Seth had performed all of them. She spoke the title formally in the Dravith tongue first and then in his language. The advisors on her side inclined their heads as she spoke. Behind Seth, he heard one of Ford's crew make a small involuntary sound. Then the Queen told him what it meant in practical terms. The outpost would receive a royal mark on its gate. A physical mark, placed by the crown, which every Dravith in every sector of their territory would recognize. No Dravith vessel would ever threaten this outpost. No Dravith warrior would ever raise a weapon against anyone sheltering within its fence. The mark was permanent and it was absolute, and it carried the full authority of the Crown House behind it. Any Dravith who violated it would answer directly to the Queen. There was more. Trade routes that had never crossed near Vareth 9 would be opened. Supply advantages that the outpost had been too low priority to access would be made available. The Galactic Council, the Queen noted with a tone that suggested she found the Council only mildly relevant, would be formally notified of the outpost's new status and could adjust their classifications accordingly. She paused. She said that these were the formal obligations of the title, but that she was also, separately and personally, prepared to offer Seth whatever he wished for himself. She said this plainly without performance. It was a debt acknowledged and she intended to honor it in full. He could name what he wanted. Seth was quiet for a moment. Ford, standing to the side, had the expression of a man watching someone standing in front of an open treasury trying to decide which hand to use first. Seth said he did not need much. The Queen waited. He said the outpost heating unit was old and the efficiency had been dropping for the past year. The cold was manageable for most of the crew, but there were 3 older members who felt it badly through the winter months, and the requests for a replacement unit had been in the council's pending queue for a long time without moving. He said if there was any way to move that along, that would be appreciated. The silence that followed lasted long enough that one of the advisors turned to look at another advisor. The Queen looked at Seth for a moment in the way she had looked at him the evening before, that complete, unhurried reading of something she wanted to understand fully. Then she said that the heating unit would be replaced before her ship left the atmosphere. She would have her engineers see to it within the hour. Seth thanked her. Ford made a sound that was not quite a word. The formal part of the meeting ended. The advisors moved back to the ship. Ford stood very still for a moment, then seemed to remember that he was a person who did things, and went to send a message to the Galactic Council. Seth stood in the yard. Ember came to him then. She crossed the yard without any of the careful hesitation of the early weeks, directly, purposefully, the way she moved now when she knew where she was going. She stopped in front of him and looked up. Then she pressed her head against his hand, just as she had done the evening before when the Queen had inclined her head and the warriors had lowered their weapons. He rested his hand on top of her head and stood there for a moment. Then the Queen was beside them. She looked at her daughter with the expression that Seth had caught for just a moment the evening before, the one that lived underneath all the authority and the armor and the ancient weight of the crown. She said something to Ember in the Dravith tongue. Quiet and low for Ember alone. Ember made a sound back. A conversation of 2 words, maybe 3, that Seth could not follow. Then the Queen looked at Seth. She said that Ember would need to come home now. That there were things waiting for her, responsibilities and learning and the particular growing up that came with being who she was. She said this without apology but also without coldness. It was simply true. Seth nodded. He knew. He crouched down so he was level with Ember. He looked at her amber eyes, still warm, still carrying that particular glow that had given him the name for her in the first place. He said, quietly and simply, that she needed to eat properly when she got home. That sleep mattered. That she should let her wing rest until it was fully healed. Ember looked at him. She made the small sound she always made when she understood something and wanted him to know it. Then, from somewhere she produced the last gift. He did not see where it came from. She simply had it and she placed it on the ground in front of him. A smooth stone, darker than the first one she had ever brought, with a faint line of gold through its center. He picked it up and held it. He stood. She turned and walked toward her mother, and the 2 of them walked back to the ship together, and the ship closed and after a while it rose. That evening Seth took his meal outside. He sat on his step. The yard was quiet. The space beside the broken crate was empty. The sky above the fence went its dark blue, slow and steady, the way it always did. In his jacket pocket his hand found the smooth stone with the gold line through it. He took it out and held it in his palm and looked at the sky. He finished his meal. He sat there a while longer, in the cold, in the quiet, in the dark blue evening of a planet that nobody had wanted to be sent to and that had turned out, in the end, to be exactly the right place for him to be. He had not tried to do anything remarkable. He had been hungry at the end of a long day, and he had seen a child who was hungrier, and he had shared what he had. That was the whole of it. That was all it had ever been. And somehow, without any intention or plan or understanding of what he was setting in motion, that one simple human choice had changed things. For the outpost. For the sectors around it. For the long careful distance between humankind and dragonkind that had never quite closed until a lonely man sat down on a cold step with half a meal and waited quietly for a frightened child to trust him. He put the stone back in his pocket. He went inside. The heating unit, he noticed as he passed through the corridor, was already running warmer.